All right, so today we're diving into some pretty interesting stuff. We've got this article that claims to have the secrets to controlling any person and situation. Kind of a bold claim, right?
Yeah, it definitely sounds a little intense.
But we're not going to be like, master manipulators or anything. Instead, we're going to break down 7 psychological tricks that the article talks about. And while the language might be a bit strong, I think there are some genuinely insightful tips in here about how we understand social dynamics.
It's like getting a peek behind the curtain to see how people's minds work. And what's really fascinating is how these so-called tricks actually connect to some pretty fundamental psychological principles. Things like, cognitive dissonance or the power of nonverbal cues and how our brains just naturally react in certain situations.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about understanding the why behind the how.
Right.
So let's jump right in with the first trick, which is all about strategic seating. Have you ever noticed how you just feel more comfortable in certain spots? Especially when you're having a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And the article mentioned something that I've definitely experienced myself, like sitting near a window or a door, while it might seem like a nice spot, can actually make people less receptive to what you're saying.
Really? I would have thought that would make people more relaxed.
It's kind of counterintuitive, right? But it all comes down to our primal instincts.
Yeah.
Our brains are wired to be on alert for potential threats,
Right.
And subconsciously, having an easy escape route can be more distracting than we realize. Even if we're not in any actual danger, that ancient part of our brain is still kind of subtly influencing our focus.
So it's not just about getting the best view. It's about creating an environment where the other person feels safe and focused.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fascinating. So like if you're in a meeting or negotiating a deal, you might want to think twice about where you position yourself and the other person.
Think about it this way. If you're sitting across from someone with their back to the wall, and they're facing a busy street, their attention might be divided.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
But if you sit them facing you with a clear view of the room, you're subtly encouraging their brain to relax and focus on you.
Okay, I'm already rethinking my go-to coffee shop table. So trick number 2 is called the Benjamin Franklin effect.
This was a classic.
What's that all about?
Have you ever heard the story about how Benjamin Franklin won over a political rival by asking him for a favor?
I think I vaguely remember something about a book.
You got it. He asked to borrow a rare book from this rival, who really disliked him.
Oh, wow.
And this is where the psychology gets really interesting. When we do something that contradicts our beliefs, in this case, doing something nice for someone we dislike, our minds try to resolve that conflict.
So it's like our brain is saying, wait a minute, I did something nice for this person. Maybe I don't dislike them as much as I thought I did.
Exactly. It's called cognitive dissonance. And the easiest way for our brains to resolve that dissonance is to actually shift our attitude, to be more in line with our actions.
So by asking for a small favor, like a book or a piece of advice, you're subtly prompting the other person's brain to reconsider their perception of you.
Precisely.
That's incredibly clever. I'm definitely going to have to experiment with this one. All right, trick number 3 is all about smiles. It seems pretty obvious that smiling is good for building rapport. What's the trick here?
It's all about timing. The article emphasizes that it's not about just like plastering on a fake smile all the time.
Right.
Instead, you want to focus on mirroring the other person's expressions. When they smile or laugh, especially if you're making eye contact, smile back genuinely.
So you're basically associating yourself with their positive emotions.
Exactly. Think about it when you share a genuine laugh with someone. Even if it's a stranger, there's this instant connection. You're both experiencing a moment of joy, and that shared experience creates a bond.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you meet someone and you just click right away. Maybe it's because you're both genuinely enjoying the conversation and feeding off of each other's positive energy. I'm starting to see how these seemingly simple tricks are really tapping into some powerful psychological principles.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of human interaction and uncovering the subtle forces at play.
Okay, this next one is a little mischievous, ignoring the ego. Is this like full-on ghosting someone who has a big ego?
Not quite. It's more about strategically withholding the constant attention and validation that someone with a big ego craves.
So are you saying that by not fawning over them, you make them want your approval even more?
It can definitely have that effect. By not feeding their ego, you're disrupting their expectations. and making them wonder why you're not as impressed as everyone else. It can make you seem more intriguing, and it can make them work harder to win your favor.
So it's not about being rude or dismissive. It's about choosing when and how you acknowledge their ego.
Exactly. And remember, this doesn't just apply to people who are overtly arrogant. This principle can also come into play when you're trying to create a sense of mystery or, play hard to get in a social setting.
Okay. I can definitely see how that would be effective.
Yeah.
Now, trick number 5 involves food. Tell me about the power of dining diplomacy.
We all know that food has a way of bringing people together.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, there's actually a scientific reason for that.
No.
The article highlights how eating triggers a physiological response in our bodies. It shifts us from that fight or flight mode to more relaxed rest and digest state.
That makes so much sense. I definitely feel more agreeable after a good meal.
Exactly. When our basic needs are met, we're more open to new ideas and perspectives. It's why so many important conversations, family discussions, business deals, even romantic proposals happen over dinner.
It's like you're creating a safe and comfortable space for open communication. Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. A lot of these tricks are really about understanding how to subtly influence the environment and the other person's state of mind to create a more positive and productive interaction.
That's a great observation. It's not about forcing someone to do something. It's about understanding how to create the right conditions for genuine connection and understanding. All right, now for trick number 6, speaking with authority. This one is all about the power of language, right?
Absolutely.
What are some key takeaways here?
The article points out that even seemingly insignificant words can undermine your message. Words like maybe or I think, while intended to convey politeness or humility, can actually make you sound less confident.
Right.
And when you sound less confident, people are less likely to trust your judgment or follow your lead.
It's like you're subtly giving away your power by not fully owning your statements.
Exactly.
So even if you don't feel 100% certain, try speaking with conviction.
Instead of saying, I think this might be a good idea, say, this is a good idea because... So it's not about being arrogant or overbearing. It's about projecting a sense of confidence in your ideas and your ability to make decisions.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be especially important in professional settings where you need to inspire confidence in your team or clients.
Absolutely. Projecting authority through your language can be incredibly powerful in any situation where you need to influence or persuade.
Okay, that makes sense. And that leads us to our final trick, the strategic gaze. We all know that eye contact is important for building rapport, but in some situations, staring someone down can backfire.
Right. The article suggests an alternative.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the secret?
Instead of focusing directly on the other person's eyes, try looking at the space between their eyebrows.
So you're still making eye contact, but without that intensity, that can make people feel uncomfortable or threatened.
You got it. It's a subtle but incredibly effective way to de-escalate tension. It conveys a sense of calmness and control without appearing confrontational.
Wow, I can definitely see how that would be helpful in dealing with someone who is angry or upset. It's like you're sending a calming signal without saying a word.
Exactly.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the psychology of social dynamics. I'm already thinking about how I can apply these tricks in my own life.
I think what's important to remember is that these strategies, while presented as ways to control people, are really about understanding human behavior. And when we understand human behavior, we can navigate our interactions more effectively and build stronger, more positive relationships.
So it's not about manipulating people, it's about becoming more aware of the subtle dynamics at play and using that knowledge to our advantage.
Absolutely.
I can't wait to dive into even more of these psychological insights. Join us for part 2, where we'll continue to explore these fascinating tricks and their potential applications in our everyday lives. Welcome back to our deep dive.
Yeah, it's like we're uncovering this hidden code of human interaction.
I know, right? We're seeing how these strategies, when used mindfully, can actually help us navigate social situations better and really enhance our relationships.
For sure.
Like we were just talking about that strategic gaze.
Right.
That idea of focusing on someone's forehead instead of their eyes during like a tense situation.
Yeah, that technique really taps into our need for safety and connection. By softening our gaze, we're kind of sending a signal that we're not a threat, which can help de-escalate the situation and create some trust.
It's like a secret weapon for diffusing tension. It all comes down to understanding how our brains work in certain situations.
It really does.
It's amazing how much is going on beneath the surface.
All right.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's quickly recap the 7 tricks we've talked about so far.
Okay, so we've got strategic seating, The Benjamin Franklin effect, the power of a well-timed smile, ignoring the ego, dying diplomacy, speaking with authority, and the strategic gaze.
Each one giving us a little glimpse into how the human mind works. And as we've been discussing, while the article calls these techniques ways to control people, I think we're finding out they can be used for a lot more than that.
Oh, definitely. It all depends on your intention and how you use them. Instead of looking at these strategies as ways to manipulate or dominate others, we can think of them as tools for building understanding, empathy, and trust.
It's like taking a weapon and turning it into a shield. We can use this knowledge to protect ourselves from being manipulated, but also to build a more harmonious world.
I love that.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm realizing these tricks aren't just about influencing others. They can also help us understand our own biases and tendencies.
That's such an important point, like understanding cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Can help us see when our own actions and beliefs don't line up.
It's like sometimes we might say we believe in one thing, but then we act in a way that totally contradicts that.
Exactly. And by becoming aware of that dissonance, we can start making choices that actually align with our values.
And understanding nonverbal cues can help us be more mindful of the messages we're sending, even when we don't realize it.
Right. Are our facial expressions and body language matching up with what we're saying? Or are we sending mixed signals?
It's like we're holding up a mirror to ourselves.
Exactly.
This conversation is really making me think about the responsibility that comes with having this kind of knowledge. We've been focusing on the positive ways to use these tricks, but we need to acknowledge that they could be used to manipulate people too.
You're absolutely right. Like any tool, these psychological insights can be used for good or for bad. That's why it's so important to approach them ethically.
So we need to ask ourselves, am I using this knowledge to help myself and others, or am I using it to control people?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Okay, so we've talked about using these tricks for collaboration and self-awareness, but I'd love to hear more specific examples of how we can use these principles in real life to build stronger connections and resolve conflicts peacefully.
Sure, let's say you and a close friend are having a disagreement. Instead of letting things escalate, you could try using some of these techniques.
Okay, walk me through it.
Well, first, you could suggest meeting for a meal to talk things over.
Bringing in that dining diplomacy.
Exactly. Sharing a meal creates a more relaxed atmosphere, which can make it easier to have a difficult conversation.
Yeah, it's like taking the edge off a bit.
Right, and while you're eating, you can practice speaking with authority.
Huh.
So instead of saying things like, maybe we should try this, you could say, I feel strongly about this because...
You're expressing your thoughts and feelings clearly and confidently.
Exactly. And this is also a good time to use the strategic gaze. If you see your friend getting upset, you can soften your gaze by looking at their forehead. This can help calm things down.
You're showing them that you're not trying to control the conversation, but you are inviting them to understand each other.
Exactly. And as you talk, you could even try using the Benjamin Franklin effect. Instead of telling your friend they need to see things your way, you could ask them for a small favor, like, would you mind helping me understand your perspective? I really want to see things from your point of view.
That's so smart. You're showing that you value their opinion, and you're subtly encouraging them to be open with you too.
Exactly. And by using these techniques, you can turn a potential argument into a chance to connect on a deeper level.
It's amazing how these simple tricks can have such a big impact on our relationships.
It's all about using what we know about human psychology to create win-win situations.
So we've talked about reframing these tricks as tools for collaboration and self-awareness, but I'm curious how they might apply to bigger issues. Like, could these insights be used to deal with things like political polarization or conflict resolution on a global scale?
It's a big question, right? Like, can we really take these principles of influence and apply them to something as massive as global conflict? Well, you know, it's interesting to think about. Like, imagine if world leaders used the strategic gaze during those high-stakes negotiations. Or if political campaigns focused more on making real connections instead of just, trying to divide everyone.
It's like taking those tricks and putting them on a global stage, but the question is, would it actually make a difference in those really complex situations?
I think it could, but it would take a huge shift in mindset. Like, think about the Benjamin Franklin effect. What if, instead of always demonizing the other side, we tried to find ways to cooperate?
Even in small ways.
Yet even little things could start to break down those walls of prejudice.
So by finding some common ground and working together, we can slowly rebuild trust and start to understand each other better.
Exactly. It's about creating a space for dialogue where everyone feels heard and respected, even if they don't agree on everything. And that's where speaking with authority comes in.
Right.
Leaders who can really articulate that vision of unity and cooperation
Yeah.
can have a huge impact on how people think.
It's like they set the tone for the whole conversation.
Exactly. And we can't forget about strategic seating, even metaphorically speaking. If we want to bridge those divides, we need to create environments where people feel safe sharing their perspectives and really listening to each other.
That makes sense, but is it really realistic? I mean, can we really expect people to change how they approach conflict, especially on such a large scale?
It's definitely not easy, but I don't think it's impossible. I mean, these psychological principles are part of who we are as humans. We all want to connect with others. We want to understand each other and feel like we belong. If we can tap into those basic needs, I think we can create a more compassionate and collaborative world.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We started with those 7 psychological tricks, and now we're talking about the potential for real positive change, both in our own lives and on a global scale.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you. I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have the power to influence the world around us. When we understand how our interactions work, we can make choices that lead to more understanding, empathy, and connection.
So as we wrap things up, I want you to think about how you can use these insights in your own life, whether it's dealing with a conflict with someone you know, building stronger relationships, or just becoming a better communicator. Remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thanks for joining us on this journey.